December 6th is considered a day of giving in many parts of the world. It was St. Nicholas Day. Children put their boots outside their doors, families baked cookies, and fairy lights decorated the windowsills. In Austin, Texas, too, the city was in the midst of the pre-Christmas season. The nights had grown cooler, but the sky above the city remained clear. Soft Christmas music played in the shopping malls as customers strolled through aisles filled with special offers. On that evening in 1991, a quiet, almost sleepy atmosphere also prevailed in a small yogurt shop on West Anderson Lane. "I Can't Fight This Feeling" by REO Speedwagon played softly in the background as four girls between the ages of 13 and 17 waited for the shop to close. Two of them, Jennifer Harbison and Eliza Thomas, worked at the store regularly. For them, it was a typical weekend evening. Sarah Harbison, Jennifer's younger sister, and her friend Amy Ayers were visiting and waiting to drive home together. The atmosphere was friendly. The girls laughed, told stories, and filled the yogurt machines for the last time. There were hardly any customers at that time of day. The few who came in grabbed a cup to go or stayed only briefly. The shift was due to end in a few minutes, a normal evening in an unremarkable store. But no one could have guessed that this evening would not end quietly, that this St. Nicholas Day would not end with sweets, but would turn into a nightmare that was brewing behind the friendly facade of a yogurt shop, and that would change four families forever. Around midnight, a patrol officer noticed smoke coming from West Anderson Lane. The smoke was billowing from the entrance of the yogurt shop, which should have been closed at that hour. Firefighters arrived within minutes. The windows were fogged up, and the lights inside had already flickered out. The men broke down the door and made their way through the acrid smoke and flickering embers. What they found inside was beyond imagination. Amid melted plastic, burned furniture, and charred remains, they discovered four bodies, lying on top of each other, naked, some bound. One of the bodies had a gunshot wound to the back of the head, while others showed signs of severe violence. Particularly disturbing, one victim was believed to have still been alive when the fire was set. That same night, the crime scene was cordoned off. Forensic investigators, crime scene technicians, and fire experts arrived. It was immediately clear that this was no accident, no short circuit, no unfortunate chain of circumstances. It was murder. Four murders, carried out with such cold-bloodedness that even experienced emergency responders were pushed to their limits. In the early hours of the morning, onlookers began to gather. Rumors spread quickly. A robbery, a crime of passion, a ritual murder. The police kept a low profile. Little was known, no surveillance cameras, no eyewitnesses, just four young girls who had been brutally murdered, and a town that suddenly found itself in the middle of a nightmare. The four victims were identified the next morning. Jennifer Harbison, 17, was a popular student and captain of the track team. Her younger sister Sarah, who had just turned 15, was considered bright and had a dry sense of humor. Eliza Thomas, also 17, had big plans. She wanted to study veterinary medicine. And Amy Ayers, only 13 years old, was the youngest victim. She had spontaneously decided to go to the store that evening just to accompany her friend. The families were torn from their reality overnight. There was no warning, no explanation, just a phone call that changed everything. The girls' parents arrived during the morning, many of them having to be guided through police cordons. Some collapsed, others stood silently, staring at the charred facade of the store. No one could comprehend how a place where yogurt was sold and laughter rang out had become the scene of one of the most gruesome crimes in Texas. The police set up a special task force. Investigators combed the area, interviewed neighbors, collected ashes, hair, and DNA. But the fire had destroyed most of the evidence. There were indications that an accelerant had been used, probably gasoline. The victims had apparently been tied up, and some evidence pointed to sexual violence. It was a crime with chaotic, yet methodical elements, a contradiction that left investigators baffled. Media outlets reported on the case nationwide. Pressure on the police mounted. The city demanded answers, and parents demanded justice. And deep down, everyone wondered, who could be capable of such a thing? The first days after the crime were marked by fear, confusion, and rumors. Parents suddenly started accompanying their children to school again, even though they were old enough to go on their own. Experts discussed the possibility of a ritual motive, youth gangs, or escaped criminals on talk shows. The police remained tight-lipped, neither confirming suspicions nor expressing any suspicions. However, what the investigators did not make public was that there were some clues pointing to possible suspects. An anonymous witness had spoken of two young men who had been in the vicinity shortly before closing time. Others spoke of strange figures who had been seen in the store on several occasions, but none of the clues were concrete enough to arrest anyone. Days turned into weeks. The funerals of the four girls were attended by large crowds. Entire school classes came, teachers, neighbors, people from other cities. The coffins were closed. The details that emerged from the initial investigations were so difficult to bear that even police officers received psychological counseling. A particularly disturbing finding concerned Amy Ayers, the youngest of the four. She had not been killed by the first shot. She was probably still alive when the second shot was fired. The exact sequence of events could not be reconstructed, but the picture was clear. She had suffered. The idea was unbearable for the family, for the public, for the investigators. The press soon dubbed the crime the yogurt shop murders, a name so banal and tangible that it stood in stark contrast to the horrific content. But even with a name, the crime remained faceless for a long time, without a perpetrator, without justice. It was not until 2 years later, in 1999, that the case began to move forward. The police had never given up. Officers had spent hundreds of hours working through old leads, using new technologies and comparing DNA profiles. A new lead pointed to 4 young men, all between the ages of 15 and 17 at the time. They had previously been noticed in the vicinity of the store, had committed minor offenses, and one of them, Maurice Pierce, was carrying a gun at the time of the crime, the same caliber used in the shooting. Investigators arrested Pierce, Forrest Wellborn, Robert Springsteen, and Michael Scott. The interrogations of Scott and Springsteen in particular led to a dramatic turn of events. Both confessed. Scott said he had held 2 of the girls while Springsteen raped them. Afterwards, they set the fire to destroy evidence. However, the manner in which these confessions were obtained soon became the subject of fierce criticism. Scott's interrogation had lasted over 20 hours, without a lawyer or his parents present. He was still a young man at the time, mentally unstable and intimidated. He later testified that he had been under pressure. Springsteen's statements also appeared contradictory in parts. There was no DNA evidence, no eyewitnesses, no clear motive, only these incriminating statements. Despite the doubts, the trial went ahead. Springsteen and Scott were convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment based almost entirely on their own statements. The public was divided. Some were relieved that someone had finally been brought to justice. Others doubted whether the right men were behind bars. The victims' families also had mixed feelings. They wanted justice, but not dubious convictions. And the longer the case dragged on, the more their fear grew. What if the real killer was still at large? In 2008, almost 2 decades after the crime, there was a shocking twist. New DNA analysis, carried out using the latest methods, showed conclusively that the DNA found on Amy Ayers' body did not belong to Robert Springsteen or Michael Scott. It was the DNA of an unknown man. The charges collapsed, the convictions were overturned, and the men were released. The news spread like wildfire. After years of believing the case was closed, everything was back on the table. The police had to justify themselves once again for the way the interrogations were conducted, for the lack of material evidence, for an investigation that relied primarily on confessions that now appeared questionable. For the victims' families, it was another blow. First the loss, then the apparent justice, and now the realization that the perpetrator might still be free, that the real killer had never been brought to justice, that what they had thought was the end was only another interim stage. Austin changed over the years, grew, modernized, but in the minds of many, December 6, 1991, remained a sharp divide, a day that changed everything. The yogurt shop murders became a dark chapter in the city's history, a case that was not forgotten even decades later. To this day, no one has been convicted, and while files gathered dust and witnesses remain silent, a depressing void remains. 4 young lives extinguished, and a perpetrator who was never named. The yogurt shop murders are one of those cases that do not fade away even after decades, not only because of the cruelty of the crime, but because of the unanswered questions that hang over everything like shadows. Who was the unknown man whose DNA was found? Was he alone? Were innocent men convicted for years for a crime they did not commit? Or was only half the truth uncovered? For many, the crime is a symbol of the failure of the system, a system that was too quick to find a solution, too quick to make statements about evidence. For others, it is a reminder that justice takes time, perseverance, and doubt. The victims' families never forgot their daughters. Pictures still hang in schools, and scholarships bear their names. But these memorials tell only part of the story. The other part, the part that may never be fully told, is about what could have been prevented, about trust that was broken, and about a promise that remains unfulfilled to this day. The truth.